Chicago is an American rock band formed in 1967 in Chicago, Illinois. The self-described rock and roll band with horns began as a politically charged, sometimes experimental, rock band and later moved to a predominantly softer sound, generating several hit ballads. The group had a steady stream of hits throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Second only to the Beach Boys in Billboard singles and albums chart success among American bands, Chicago is one of the longest-running and most successful rock groups, and one of the world's best-selling groups of all time, having sold more than 100 million records. According to Billboard, Chicago was the leading U.S. singles charting group during the 1970s. They have sold over 40 million units in the U.S., with 23 gold, 18 platinum, and 8 multi-platinum albums. Over the course of their career they have had 5 number-1 albums and 21 top 10 singles. Group history, Chicago Transit Authority and early success. The original band membership consisted of saxophonist Walter Parizalida, guitarist Terry Kath, drummer Danny Serafine, trombonist James Pankow, trumpet player Lee Lufnin, and keyboardist-singer Robert Lamb. Parizalida, Kath, Serafine, Pankow and Lufnin met in 1967 while students at DePaul University. Lamb was recruited from Roosevelt University. The group of 6 called themselves The Big Thing, and continued playing top 40 hits. Realizing the need for a tenor to complement baritone Lamb and Kath, they added local tenor and bassist Peter Cetera. Jimi Hendrix once told Parizalida, "Geez, your horn players are like one set of lungs and your guitar player is better than me." While gaining some success as a cover band, the group began working on original songs. In June 1968, they moved to Los Angeles, California under the guidance of their manager James William Guercio, and signed with Columbia Records. After signing with Guercio, The Big Thing changed their name to Chicago Transit Authority. Their first record, the eponymous Chicago Transit Authority, is a double album, which is rare for a band's first release. It sold over 1 million copies by 1970, and was awarded a platinum disc. The album included a number of pop rock songs. Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is? Beginnings, Questions 67 and 68, and I'm a Man. Which were later released as singles. When the actual Chicago Transit Authority threatened legal action soon after the album's release, the band's name was shortened to Chicago. The 1970s, Chicago, the band released a second album, titled Chicago, which is another double LP. The album's centerpiece track is a 7-part, 13-minute suite composed by Pankow called Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan. The suite yielded 2 top 10 hits, Make Me Smile, and Color My World, both sung by Kath. Among the other tracks on the album, Lamb's dynamic but cryptic 25 or 6/4, which is a reference to a songwriter trying to write at 25 or 26 minutes before 4 o'clock in the morning, and was sung by Cetera with wah-wah guitar by Kath. The lengthy war protest song It Better End Soon. And, at the end, Cetra's 1969 moon landing-inspired, Where Do We Go From Here? The double LP album's inner cover includes the playlist, the entire lyrics to It Better End Soon, and 2 declarations, this album should be experienced sequentially, and, with this album, we dedicate ourselves, our futures and our energies to the people of the revolution. And the revolution in all of its forms. Chicago 3 would contain 2 hit singles. Free from Lamb's Travel Suite would become the album's biggest hit. The band would release LPs at a rate of at least 1 album per year from their third album in 1971 on through the 1970s. During this period, the group's album titles invariably consisted of the band's name followed by a Roman numeral, indicating the album's sequence in their canon. The exceptions to this scheme were the band's 4th album, a live box set entitled Chicago at Carnegie Hall, their 12th album Hot Streets, and the Arabic-numbered Chicago 13. While the live album itself did not bear a number, each of the 4 discs within the set was numbered volumes I through 4. In 1971, the band released Chicago at Carnegie Hall volumes I, 3, and 4, consisting of live performances, mostly of music from their first 3 albums, from a week-long run at the famous venue. The packaging of the album also contained some rather strident political messaging about how we, youth, can change the system, including massive wall posters and voter registration information. Nevertheless, Chicago at Carnegie Hall went on to become the best-selling box set by a rock act, and held that record for 15 years. The fact that none of the first 4 titles were issued on single LPs was due to the productive creativity of this period and the length of the jazz rock pieces. In 1972 the band released its first single disc release, Chicago V, which reached number 1 on both the Billboard Pop and Jazz album charts. It features Saturday in the Park, which mixes everyday life and political yearning in a more subtle way. It peaked at No. 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1972. Chicago would long open their concerts with the hit song. Another Lamb-composed hit song therein was Dialogue, which featured a musical debate between a political activist and a Blaser copyright college student. In 1973, the group's manager, Xxxiv, produced and directed Electra Glide in Blue, a movie about an Arizona motorcycle policeman. The movie starred Robert Blake and featured Cetra, Kath, Lufnan, and Paris Leader in supporting roles. The group also appeared prominently on the movie's soundtrack. Other albums and singles followed in each of the succeeding years. 1973's Chicago 6 was the first of several albums to include Brazilian jazz percussionist Loder de Oliveira and saw Cetra emerge as the main lead singer. Chicago 7, the band's double-disc 1974 release, their 1975 release, Chicago 8, featured the political allegory Harry Truman, and the nostalgic Panko-composed Old Days. That summer also saw a joint tour across America with the Beach Boys, with both acts performing separately, then coming together for a finale. 1976's Chicago X features Cetra's ballad If You Leave Me Now, which held the top spot in the US charts and the UK charts. The song also won Chicago their only Grammy Award, for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group in 1977. The tune almost did not make the cut for the album. If You Leave Me Now was recorded at the very last minute. The success of the song foreshadowed a later reliance on ballads. The group's 1977 release, Chicago 11, includes Cetra's ballad Baby, What a Big Surprise, a No. 4 US hit which became the group's last top 10 hit of the decade. Death of Terry Kath and transition, 1978 began with a split with manager Xxxiv. On January 23 of that same year Kath died of an accidental, self-inflicted gunshot wound. After auditioning over 30 potential replacements for Kath, Chicago decided upon guitarist-songwriter Donnie Dacus. Also being filmed for the musical Hair at the time, he joined the band in April 1978 just in time for the Hot Streets album. Its energetic lead-off single, Alive Again, brought Chicago back to the top 15. Panko wrote it originally as a love song but ultimately as recognition of Kath's guiding spirit shining down from above. The 1978 album Hot Streets had producer for Ramon at the helm. It was Chicago's first album with a title rather than a number, and was the band's first LP to have a picture of the band featured prominently on the cover. These two moves were seen by many as indications that the band had changed following Kath's death. To a degree, the band returned to the old naming scheme on its subsequent releases, although most titles would now bear Arabic numerals rather than Roman numerals. Hot Streets, the band's 12th album, peaked at number 12 on the Billboard charts. It was Chicago's first release since their debut to fail to make the top 10. The release also marked a move somewhat away from the jazz rock direction favored by Kath and towards more pop songs and ballads. Dacus stayed with the band through the 1979 album Chicago 13, and is also featured in a promotional video on the DVD included in the Rhino Records Chicago box set from 2003. Again produced by Ramon, it was the group's first studio album not to contain a top 40 hit. Dacus departed from the band shortly after the album's release. The 1980s, Changing Sound, and the ballads, Chicago 14, produced by Tom Dowd, relegated the horn section to the background on a number of tracks, and the album's two singles failed to make the top 40. Chris Pinnock joined the band to handle the guitar duties and would remain through 1985, and the band were also augmented by saxophone player Marty Grebe on the subsequent tour. Believing the band to no longer be commercially viable, Columbia Records dropped them from its roster in 1981 and released a second Greatest Hits volume later that year to fulfill its contractual obligation. In late 1981 the band had a new producer, a new label, and the addition of keyboardist, guitarist, and singer Bill Champlin. Percussionist Loda de Oliveira and Marty Grebe departed from the band. During Foster's stewardship, less of an emphasis was placed on the band's horn-based sound, being replaced by lush power ballads, which became Chicago style during the 1980s. The new sound brought more single success to the band than they had ever had prior to that point, but it reportedly caused internal friction within the band members, which in turn reportedly led to Cetera's departure in 1985. For the 1982 album Chicago 16, Foster brought in studio musicians for some of the tracks, and used new technology to update and streamline the sound, further pushing back the horn section, and in some cases not even using them at all. The band did return to the charts with the Cetera-sung ballad Hard to Say I'm Sorry Get Away, which is featured in the soundtrack of the Daryl Hannah film Summer Lovers. 1984's Chicago 17 became the biggest-selling album of the band's history, producing 2 more top 10 singles, You're the Inspiration, and Hard Habit to Break. The album included 2 other singles, Stay the Night, and Along Comes a Woman. Peter's brother, Kenny Cetera, was brought into the group for the 17 tour to add percussion and high harmony vocals. By 1985, the band was embracing the newest medium, the music video channel MTV, by releasing music videos for 4 songs. They featured a track titled Good for Nothing on the 1985 global activist album, We Are the World. The departure of Cetera, concurrently with Chicago's existing career, lead vocalist Peter Cetera had begun a solo career. Cetera ultimately left Chicago in the summer of 1985. He soon topped the charts with Glory of Love, and with The Next Time I Fall. 2 more songs reached a top 10, a 1988 solo hit called One Good Woman, and a 1989 duet with Cher called After All. In 1992, Cetera released his 4th studio album, World Falling Down, which earned him 3 hits on the adult contemporary charts, including the single Restless Heart. For the final Foster-produced album, Chicago 18, Cetera's former position was filled in September 1985 by bassist-songwriter Jason Scheff, son of Elvis Presley's bassist Jerry Scheff. The album included the number 3 single Will You Still Love Me? And top 20 pop song, and also an updated version of 25 or 6-4 with a video that got airplay on MTV. Soon after the album was recorded, the band hired guitarist Dwayne Bailey, formerly of Bob Seger's Silver Bullet Band. Bailey and Scheff had previously played in bands together, so Scheff introduced Bailey to the band in time for the Chicago 18 tour. With the 1988 released Chicago 19, the band had replaced producer Foster with co-producers Ron Nevison and Chas Sanford, and they topped the charts again with the Diane Warren-composed single Look Away. The album also yielded 2 more top 10 hits, both with Champlin singing solo lead for the first time, and released a top 5 single titled, What Kind of Man Would I Be? The latter would be included on the forthcoming Greatest Hits record. Chicago 19 was followed in short order by their 20th album, Greatest Hits 1982–1989. This included a slightly remixed version of Chicago 19's number 5 hit, What Kind of Man Would I Be? Sung by Scheff. The album's other top 10 hit, You're Not Alone, reached number 10 in early 1989. In closing out the decade on an all-time high of 4 hit-making albums, Chicago began a duet tour with the Beach Boys through the summer and fall of 1989. The 1990s, more changes in Stone of Sisyphus. The beginning of the 1990s brought yet another personal change. Founding member Danny Seraphine was succeeded in 1990 by Tris Imboden, a longtime drummer with Kenny Loggins and former session drummer with Peter Cetera. Imboden made his first appearance on the 1991 album 21, which yielded an 11-week stretch on Billboard. a peak at number 66, and the song Chase in the Wind, which peaked at number 39. 21 would be their last released album of original music for 15 years. The band was recognized with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on July 23, 1992. In 1993, Chicago wrote and recorded their 22nd album Stone of Sisyphus. This album was to have marked their return to their traditional composition of the 1970s, emphasizing major horn accompaniment and much more solid writing. However, following a reorganization of the record company, the new executives at Reprise Records spontaneously and controversially rejected the completed album. It remained unpublished for 15 years, aside from bootleg tapes and internet files. This contributed to the parting of the band from the record label. Fans were left in the dark by the failure of the label and of the band to issue any official press releases regarding the album's shelving and regarding the subsequent departure of guitarist Dwayne Bailey, leading to many years of debates and conjecture about the events surrounding the recordings. It was also suggested some years later that the band's management was negotiating with the label regarding a licensing of the extensive Chicago back catalog, and when those talks stalled, the label apparently retaliated by scrapping the project. The album eventually saw an expanded release on Rhino Records in June 2008 to favorable reviews from both fans and critics and made it to number 122 on the album charts. After finishing their 1994 tour, and after signing with the Warner Brothers imprint label Giant Records, they released their 1995 album Night and Day, Big Band, consisting of covers of songs originally recorded by Sarah Vaughan, Glenn Miller, and Duke Ellington. Session guitarist Bruce Gowich handled the guitar work, and the album featured guest appearances by Paul Shaffer of David Letterman fame, and Aerosmith guitarist Joe Perry. In 1998, Chicago released Chicago Xxv, the Christmas album, and a live album in 1999, Chicago Xxvi. The 2000s. In 2000, the band licensed their entire recorded output to Rhino Records, after having recorded it at Columbia Records and Warner Brothers. In 2002, Rhino released a 2-disc compilation, The Very Best of Chicago, Only the Beginning, which spans the band's career. The compilation made the top 40 and sold over 2 million copies in the U.S. Rhino also began releasing remastered versions of all of the band's Columbia-era albums. Chicago continued to appear worldwide, touring with the band Earth, Wind and Fire in 2004 to 2005. On March 21, 2006, their first all-new studio album since 21 arrived with Chicago XXX. It also marked the first time the band's music was available as a digital download. The album peaked at number 41 in the U.S., spawning 2 minor adult contemporary hits, Feel, and Love Will Come Back. 2 songs from this album, Feel, and Caroline, were performed live during Chicago's Fall 2005 tour. Chicago made multi-week appearances at the MGM Grand Las Vegas in March and May 2006. In July 2006, the band made a series of U.S. appearances with Huey Lewis and the News. They toured the summer of 2007 with the band America. On October 2, 2007, Rhino Records released the 2-disc The Best of Chicago, 40th Anniversary Edition, a new greatest hits compilation spanning their entire 40 years, similar to The Very Best of, Only the Beginning, released 4 years earlier. In 2008, Stone of Sisyphus, once known as the aborted Chicago XXII, now listed officially as Chicago XXXII, was released with an expanded format. In 2009, Chicago again toured with Earth, Wind and Fire. Drew Hester joined the band in January 2009 to temporarily fill in for Anil Imboden, and continued with the band as a percussionist upon Imboden's return later in the year. In August 2009, Champlin left the band to focus on his solo career. His new lineup counterpart became keyboardist Lou Padini. 2010 to present. In 2010, Chicago toured with the Doobie Brothers. A performance in Chicago, Illinois, became a video for the HDNET cable channel that featured the Doobie Brothers joining Chicago for 2 encore tunes. The band also appeared on the season 9 finale of American Idol. On July 24, 2011, the band performed at Red Rocks in Colorado, accompanied by the Colorado Symphony Orchestra. This was the first time Chicago played a full-length symphonic concert. With Chicago Xxxiii, Oh Christmas 3, the band re-teamed with producer Ramon to record a new Christmas album. It was released in October 2011. In the meantime, Rhino released Chicago Xxxiv, Live in 75, a 2-disc set containing 2 hours of previously unreleased performances recorded June 24, 26, 1975 at the Capitol Center in Largo, Maryland, featuring the original members of Chicago performing some of their greatest hits up to that point. In 2012, Chicago and the Doobie Brothers held another joint tour. That same year, Hester left the group to be succeeded, first by percussionist Daniel de los Reyes, then by Daniel's brother and former long-term Santana member, Walfredo Reyes, Jr. In 2013 Robert Lamb, Lee Lofnan, James Pankow, and Walter Parry's leader appeared in the HBO movie Clear History as the band Chicago. In late 2013, the band began releasing singles for a new album, starting with Something Comin', I Know in August, America in September, Crazy Happy in December 2013, and Naked in the Garden of Allah in January 2014. The album, titled Chicago Xxxiv, Now, is scheduled for release on July 4, 2014. Graphics: upon being renamed from Chicago Transit Authority to Chicago, the band sported a new logo. Its inspiration was found in the design of the Coca-Cola logo, in the attitude of the city of Chicago itself, and in the desire to visually transcend the individual identities of the band's constituent members. It was designed by the art director of Columbia-CBS Records, John Berg, with each album's graphic artwork being done by Nick Fasciano. Berg said, "The Chicago logo was fashioned for me by Nick Fasciano from my sketch. The logo would serve as the band's chief visual icon from Chicago 2, onward. In various artistic forms and visual similes, it has been the subject of every subsequent album cover, except the 15th album, Greatest Hits, Volume 2. For example, it appeared as an American flag on 3, a piece of wood on V, a US dollar bill on 6, an embroidered patch on 8, a chocolate bar on X, a fingerprint on 14, a computer silicon chip on 16, a parcel on 17, and a mosaic on 18. Chicago 9's incarnation was a caricature of the band itself, in the shape of the logo. The album cover series has endured as a catalogued work of art in its own right, described by Paul Nee of the American Institute of Graphic Arts as a real landmark in record cover design. In 2013, the iconic status of Chicago's album art was featured in a New York Art Museum exhibit, which centered upon 95 album covers completely selected from John Berg's career portfolio of hundreds. Having overseen the design of approximately 14 Chicago album covers across more than 20 years, Berg stated that this artistic success resulted from the combination of Chicago's unique situation, and his position in the best possible job at the best possible time to have that job, at the center of the graphic universe. The book titled Type and Image, The Language of Graphic Design described the logo as a warm vernacular form, executed in thick script letters with Victorian swashes in the tradition of sports teams and orange crate labels. The book mentions the cultural and material background of the city of Chicago as inspiration for the logo. For example, describing the leather embossing of Chicago 7 as representative of the Great Fire and the Stockades. The author connects the album art to the atmosphere of the band's namesake city, quoting the band's original manager, James William Guascio, "The printed word can never aspire to document a truly musical experience, so if you must call them something, speak of the city where all save one were born. Where all of them were schooled and bred, and where all of this incredible music went down barely noticed. Call them Chicago." Personnel, members, touring musicians, lineups, timeline. Discography. Studio albums. Live albums, Chicago at Carnegie Hall, Vols 1-4, Live in Japan, Chicago Xxxiv The Live album, Chicago Xxxiv, Live in a 75 euros. See also, best-selling music artists, references. External links, official website, Debbie Kruger's 2 interviews with Jimmy Pankow and Robert Lamb in 1999, Debbie Kruger's words on Chicago, synthesizing those 2 interviews, for Goldmine magazine in 1999, Debbie Kruger's interview with Chicago for performing songwriter in July and August 2000.